So this is a Whistleblower TV sending to you from Copenhagen. We're standing right next to the Marriott Hotel, and we are with Mark Anderson from the American Free Press. And Mark, please tell us how do you see the Bilderberg and the development in Bilderberg, the protests?
Well, here on day one, May 29, 2014, I'm not seeing the number of protesters I necessarily would have expected yet. I do know that it's a pivotal time for the Bilderberg group, or the Bilderberg meetings, as they like to call it. In a way, it's pivotal because the Eurosceptic elections that just happened here in Europe in late May have shown a revulsion, a blowback against this centralization of Europe and this consolidation of Europe that Bilderberg has been pursuing from its very inception in the 1950s. And now they're having their 62nd meeting in 60 years. They've met now for the third time in Denmark. They've met 10 times in the States over those years. And it's all about this transatlantic community that they think exists. It's just a construct in their own minds. But this transatlanticism, now they're working on the EU-US Free Trade Agreement, which I exposed a year ago, April, at a Brookings Institution meeting when they announced it then. And that's still a Bilderberg goal, to have the transatlantic trade and investment partnership. That's high on the agenda. Because this transatlantic thing is something they want to permitize. They want to make it permanent and even merge, in a way, to a degree, even merge the United States with Europe, not simply merge the European nations together.
No.
So that they're actually trying to bring the U.S. into the European fold. And that's what the EU-US Trade Pact is all about.
Yeah.
And they want the Trans-Pacific Partnership because that snags Asia, the greater Asia-Pacific Rim, into the world order. And then they want, of course, their American Union, their African Union, which goes along with the European Union, the Euro-Pacific Union, or they might call it an Asia-Pacific Union, the building blocks of global governance. And of course, this is big picture stuff. Right now, they're worried about the populist blowback, the populist rebellion via these elections that put nationalist parties into European Commission seats, European Parliament seats, and local seats. So that's some of what's going on.
Yeah, and we had just had a European election in Denmark where we had a right-wing party get 27% of the given votes. Only 55% of the Danish people voted, so there's still 45% that didn't vote. But about 1/4 of each Dane voted for
less centralization, for a return to sovereignty. Denmark has not surrendered its currency yet. Of course, they still use their national currency, even though they're part of the EU. 18 nations are part of the Eurozone of the 28 EU states. There's going to be a 19th soon that's going to be joining the Eurozone. I believe it's Estonia, if memory serves. We got to look at Estonia and Portugal. That's not official yet. But this is a very pivotal year with what's going on in Russia, the so-called invasion of Crimea, Vladimir Putin seeming to oppose the Western NATO EU world order with his own version of greater Eurasian governance. Some people are suspicious of it, some aren't, but at any rate, it does counter this juggernaut of NATO and the EU.
Yeah, and now that you speak about NATO, NATO Secretary Anders Fogh Rasmussen and Mr. Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, will be staying in the hotel. As a Danish paper wrote, Kissinger would come.
Oh, for 2014 Bilderberg?
Yeah, for this Bilderberg event.
Yeah, no surprise there. Kissinger, of course, is one of the old crew that's managed to still stay alive. And Anders Rasmussen, very high profile, heading NATO now for a number of years, including its brutal and completely inhumane assault against Libya in 2011.
And the Danish Prime Minister who pulled Denmark into the war on terror, actually, also.
Yeah, he was a former Danish Prime Minister,
he became Danish Prime Minister in 2001.
Yes, that's right.
And then only a couple of months later, he said, yes, we will support the war on terror.
I wouldn't doubt if his ascension from PM to the head of NATO was probably brokered through Bilderberg.
Yeah.
But I'm in my 5th year of Bilderberg covering that exclusive group, having been trained by Jim Tucker, the well-known Bilderberg hound, who started with the predecessor to the American Free Press, that being the Spotlight newspaper, because of the Liberty Lobby, that lobbying group first taking notice of Bilderberg. When they created the Spotlight newspaper, then they assigned Jim Tucker over the decades to cover Bilderberg. Jim, God rest his soul, having passed away a year ago, April, having trained me as his apprentice, I'm carrying on his tradition, carrying the torch, as it were. And so now one of the things I do differently, or I expand upon that Jim did, is I'm taking a harder look at the Trilateral Commission, the Atlantic Council, and other groups. It's not just Bilderberg.
No.
Bilderberg is the most exclusive and one of the smaller groups in number. There's about 140 or so from North America and Europe in Bilderberg. But Bilderberg is part of a constellation with the Atlantic Council, formed in 1961, with the Trilateral Commission, formed in 1973. It's my belief that the Trilateral Commission is kind of the private House of Representatives, and Bilderberg is sort of the private Senate of this private global governance that's going on behind the thrones of nations. And so this is what they do. They engineer kind of a private governmental system to superimpose on the so-called regular government. After all, they privatized banking. Now they're going to privatize the rest of government. And I think that's what Bilderberg and Trilateral are ultimately all about. So I think that's important to keep in mind. It's not just Bilderberg.
No, and I totally agree, and I've been doing the same stuff, because if you take Anders Fogh Rasmussen, he was in Bilderberg in 2000, he became Prime Minister in 2001. Helle Thorning-Schmidt, who is currently the Prime Minister, was in Bilderberg 2009, 2010, became Premier Minister of Denmark in 2011. And if you go to the Vice Premier Ministers of Denmark, we had a woman called Lene Espersen. She's in the Trilateral Commission, and now we have a woman called Margrethe Vestager. She's also in Trilateral Commission. And if you go back to you had in America, you had the bailouts. We had in Denmark, we call them the bank packages. And the three biggest architects of the bank package one in Denmark was also the president of the National Bank, Niels Bernstein, and the chief of a Danish bank, the largest bank in Denmark, called Peter Storup. And they are also in the Trilateral Commission. And the first bank package was in Danish kroners 4,200 billion kroners, which is 3 times what Denmark earns in a year. So they are definitely inside and making stuff.
Yeah, a source of mine from the Swedish Free Party, a new political party in Sweden that officially opposes Bilderberg. A contact of mine will be here soon, today, May 29th, day one of Bilderberg for 2014. And he pointed out, and I saw this in my own research, that Fredrik Reinfeldt, who's the current Prime Minister of Sweden, I believe that's his position,
Sweden.
through Carl Bildt, a longtime Trilateral member and Bilderberger, was put via these channels into his current position in Sweden, that being Mr. Reinfeldt. I think that's another example of the examples you've listed. And this is, of course, a common thing, that this is a conduit for deal making, both personal and global, for position, for advancing through the ranks. And the Bilderbergers, of course, and to some extent the Trilaterals, will constantly remind you that they make no decisions, they pass no resolutions, they take no votes. But of course the refrain to that is they don't have to. It's just simple consensus building, you know, to basically make sure they're making the right deals and reading off the same page. And if they don't have votes, of course, that's another way of not having a real clear record that somebody might stumble across later. It's a way of hiding the patterns, of hiding what they're doing and talking about. So it's all tactical, it's all semantics, it's consensus building, it's deal making, it's networking, and that's what they do in terms of this private governmental network and system that I've described.
If I can ask a last question, Mr. Jim Tucker, he was around Bilderberg, I think he tracked it for 20 years or something like that.
Even more, right.
Even more, okay. And it wasn't official. I remember I wrote an article in 2011, and it was Jim Tucker who founded Bilderberg. Now they are out, they are official, they're making this official website and so on. What do you see, what dragged Bilderberg into being official and not in secrecy?
Well, after Liberty Lobby created the Spotlight, the predecessor to American Free Press, and hired Tucker, what one of Jim Tucker's best accomplishments was that he got the European press to pay attention and raise this level of awareness, even though there's still, to this day, a relative blackout in American media. That wasn't the only factor, but it was a primary factor in calling enough repeated and intense and sustained attention to Bilderberg to where they felt compelled to create this website. Now, when I call the Marriott later today or tomorrow and say, is there going to be a press conference, they're going to say no. If I say, is there going to be a press release, they're going to say no. I'd be very surprised if it were otherwise. They'll wait till this is well over, and then they'll post some lame things on their website, very, very general topics, alleged topics of discussion. The list that they publish, of course, is somewhat accurate, but it's not by any means necessarily complete. But that's what propelled them, was the Jim Tucker creating the European media attention. And it's clear they said 5-6 years ago when they first posted bilderbergmeetings.org that they felt they had to be at least nominally open. But now American Free Press is calling it stealth transparency, meaning that they're open but they're not. It's all semantics. By putting very general stuff out there largely after the fact, it's ineffectual, it doesn't really mean much. It's kind of like the Federal Reserve's Open Market Committee. Yeah, they publish some minutes, and sure, it seems to have an open spirit about it, but you really don't get anything from it of substance. So here's this stealth transparency. Things are just about as secret as they always were, except for the fact that they do exist and they do meet. That, of course, is no longer a secret. But with the amount of public resources they marshal, you know, the police told me this morning, a lieutenant said straight out that 300 Danish police are coming just for this meeting at totally public expense. And now we see Bilderberg members arriving in their ubiquitous black sedans. The only thing darker being perhaps their personalities, as I always say. Tinted windows, tinted minds. But you know, it's more of the same, and they get the police to believe it's just to marshal all these public resources for a private group that can afford to pay completely for its own security. Yeah. And yet they supplement their privately paid security with public resources like this, 300 Danish police alone for the weekend.
Yeah, and we're going to pay for it.
Yeah, they told me it wasn't overtime. They have enough officers, so none of the individuals need to work overtime. We don't know if that's true. I'll take that on face value, but that's just 300 Danish cops. That's not counting other resources, the boats we see on the river. I can't believe how many police vans have come in. You know, I mean, you don't even believe that they'd all fit in this space, and yet they keep coming in. You know, I mean, that's just the local street level stuff. You know, it's a huge picture. It's still a big riddle. But if you watch the other groups, the Atlantic Council, Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, Royal Institute of International Affairs, and you begin to look at the broader constellation of things, then you get a clearer idea of what Bilderberg's about because you see the bigger picture. And I think that they're trying to train activists and alternative journalists to only look at them and ignore the Trilateral and ignore the Atlantic Council and ignore these other groups.
I totally agree. We need to look at the other organizations also. Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson.
You're welcome.
And hope to see you on the protest area in the next days.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.